When I was about 18 years old, somebody lit me on fire, and it was an industrial accident. It was supposed to be a practical joke, and it wasn't a good joke at all. Boys are funny with fire. We do things like, I don't know if you guys know this, but certain types of deodorant, you can write on the wall with them and then light them, and then it just goes blue flame through, right? You know, and it doesn't hurt anybody. The houses generally don't burn down, but then you can even do it like on somebody's back. So like when we were in boarding school, people used to do this. They'd come up and do a line of deodorant down your back and then spark it with a lighter, and it's just blue flame. You barely even feel it. But if you're in a gas station and the gas spits out of the car, you know, it used to in the old days when you were filling up, and then you walk inside and you've got gas all over you here and all over your uniform, and somebody flicks a lighter at you, it's not blue flame. It's serious fire. At first it happens and you just go, holy cow, and you try to put it out and you realize all you're doing is making it grow. And as a result of that, I ended up in the hospital for 6 weeks and had to have my arm rebuilt. They took skin off both my legs to make it happen, and my weight plummeted to some ridiculous, I don't even know if we weighed me in at that point, but I've seen pictures of me recently of what I looked like at that point, and you can actually see the bone above the bicep and below the bicep. I was so skinny. That's at 18. By the time I got to 21 years old, I was weighing in at about 185 to 190 pounds, and I was really overweight. I had unbelievable cystic acne. I was sick all the time. And you know, the reason is that from that day of being so ultra skinny to that other point, what had happened is I had continued my normal teenager eating patterns, and then I got a job that involved sitting a lot. And so I'm eating this standard American diet type lifestyle, and then I'm not moving. And so I just start putting on weight, and I start developing really bad symptoms. Many of the symptoms I'd had through my childhood, like, for example, I was always that kid with the tissue. You know which kid I'm talking about, right? And I'm always that kid with the runny nose, and always that kid with the stomach pains and digestive problems. And I just was that kid. And it had become so pervasive in my existence that I didn't even know that I was that kid. I didn't think of myself as sick. I didn't think of myself as that, you know, I was sick. I just thought of myself as in pain. And so, of course, I did go to see specialists. I went to go see doctors and try to get them to fix it. So I remember going to this one doctor because of my acne. And, you know, like when I talk about acne, there's two aspects of acne that are a drag. There's the appearance aspect of it. You know, you're a teenage boy and your face is all pocked out and stuff, and that's not so good for your self-esteem. There's also the pain aspect of it, because I had acne, cystic acne in my jawline and in my face around here that I still have scars from it now. It was so painful that sometimes smiling hurt. And so I went to a doctor one day and I said, you got to fix this. And he goes, we can fix it. And I said, great. Like, what do we do? And he goes, you just take these pills. They cost about $3 a day per pill. Of course, you know, it's Canada. The drugs were free. But I knew what they were costing because we had to go fill the prescription. And then I did something a little unusual for a 17 or 18-year-old. I actually read the side effects. And there was a warning on it that said, if you take these pills, you must use contraception. I thought that's an odd thing to say. I can tell you that in my state of life at that point, contraception was not so particularly important to me. And then it went on to say, you must use 2 forms of contraception. And I was like, you have to use 2 forms? Like, does that mean wearing 2 of them? Or I don't understand. I don't understand 2 forms of contraception. And then it went on to say that if you get pregnant or get somebody pregnant while on this medication, you must abort. What was I putting in my bloody body? What was this doctor having me put in my body? But the thing is, I'm a kid, and he has a clipboard and a stethoscope. So, and a white coat. He's got the white coat. So, you know, what choice do I have, right? And plus, on top of that, I'm in pain, and my self-esteem is in the toilet. And I'm like, I'll do it. And then he says, oh, by the way, here's the other thing. When you're on this pill, you can't have any milk or cheese or anything like that. You can't have that because the pill raises your acidity a lot. And so if you have the milk and cheese as well, it'll give you stomach ulcers and so on. So you can't have milk while you're on the pill. No problem. I can do a month without milk. I was like, in my head, I'm going, oh, my God. I eat cereal every day at midnight. You know, I eat ice cream at least every 2 days. I eat cheese pizza. I mean, okay, but look, I'm willing to take this pill. I'm willing to go without, I'll do it. And so I start taking these pills. A month later, my face is completely clear for the first time since acne started. These pills are a miracle to me. I'm hoping they have a multi-level marketing program. I want to take them out into the world, these pills. And then when the pills are finished, I'm allowed to go back onto dairy products, and so I do. And guess what? Pop, 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 pop. It all comes back. But of course, at that stage of my life, I don't spot the pattern. Because the pattern I spot is when I'm on the pills, I don't have the acne. And when I'm off them, it comes back. I don't spot this other pattern at all. As a matter of fact, it would be another 3 years before I spotted that pattern. I did not, however, renew the prescription. The doctor at that point said, well, we can just start the pills again. And at this point, they freaked me out. The prescription side effects kind of freaked me out. And I had a healthy respect of drugs. Alcohol and drugs very nearly killed both my father and my brother. And so I had a really healthy respect of those kinds of things. And I just made the decision not to continue with the medication. I thought, I'll find another way. And so I tried all the different creams and all the different scrubs and all the different things you can do. And then in the meantime, I had what they call post-nasal drip. Basically, post-nasal drip, layman's version of this is that you're producing so much extra mucus that it can't all run out your nose, and it starts running down the back of your throat. And then as it runs down the back of your throat, it interacts with your tonsils. And as it collects in your tonsils, the bacteria grows in there, and so your tonsils become infected. And so then you develop a variety of different things from tonsillitis to strep throat. And then the doctor says, well, we can fix that. How? How can we fix that? We can cut those babies out. I mean, God made a mistake about that. Evolution, Darwin, I don't know what they were thinking. We can just take those things out, right? But now again, I can't see this when I'm 17, 18 years old. I can't, when I'm 20, I can't see this, but here's something. Hang on. I had the throat infection because I had a post-nasal drip. Cause, effect. Why would cutting the tonsils out solve this problem? But he had a stethoscope and a clipboard and a white coat. You see, I was doing everything I could to deal with the pain that I had. I didn't think of myself as sick. I thought of myself as being in pain. And then one day, as many of you know, I sat down with a friend of mine, a guy named Tim Ames. And Tim Ames was doing his level best to get me to go to a seminar, and that seminar was being put on by Tony Robbins. And I was not interested. The guy's teeth were too big. He's on the TV all the time saying all that fanatical stuff, and I just wasn't really interested. But Tim kept telling me, you got to go, you got to go, you got to go. Now, Tim was smart with his marketing, right? He didn't say to me, you got to go because it's going to help you develop as a human being. He didn't say, you got to go because maybe it'll show you some stuff about health. He said, Eric, you got to go because you'll double your income. I'm 20 years old. I mean, doubling my income is pretty much the only thing that it's the second thing that I'm really concerned with, right? And he says, it'll double your income. And he goes, and by the way, there's a money-back guarantee. And I go, okay, I'll make you a deal. I know exactly how much money I'm going to make the last 3 months of this year. I know exactly because I was diligent. I was a sales guy. I knew how many calls I made every day. I was focused. And I know exactly how much money I'm going to make. And this seminar costs $1,500 for 3 days, $1,500. Are you kidding me? 20-some-odd years ago. I'm like, no, I'll make you a deal, Tim, I said. If I make $500 extra a month in October, November, December, I won't ask for my money back. And he goes, well, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. And I go, well, that's the only way it works for me to sign up. And he says, okay, fine. But if you ask for a refund, you can't tell them what your criteria was. You just got to say you weren't happy. You just got to say you weren't satisfied. You can't tell them that because that's not right. And I said, done deal. No problem. I went off and did the program. And I'm not kidding you. I actually ended up making $5,000 a month above my projections for the next 3 months. It had a massive impact on me. And that impact was nothing compared to what it did to my health. It became irrelevant. The extra money literally became irrelevant to me comparative to what happened to my health. Because what happened is that Tony and Tim implored me. They both gave me huge leverage to say, can you make some changes to your diet? And the changes they made were very pedestrian. Nothing as detailed and as complex as the research that we now have available to us. Just some basic stuff. And I made those changes, and 30 days later, no, not 30 days later, 14 days later, I look in the mirror and I notice something about my face. Now, any of you that ever suffered with acne, you will know the difference between new and old acne. You see, new acne are these little red things that are coming up, and they're tender sometimes, they hurt a little, and they're coming up. Old acne is healing. It's on the way out. And I looked in the mirror at 14 days, and I saw that all I had was old acne. Nothing new. Interesting. And then around about that same day, I woke up one morning, and I breathed in through my nose, which was amazing because I hadn't done that in like 7 years. I don't know if any of you have had that cold or that flu. You know the one where at about a week in, you start thinking to yourself, life's not worth living and that this might be like this forever. You know the cold I'm talking about. And then you know what it's like when you take that first breath in and you can breathe properly? And even maybe your sinuses are a little tender when you breathe in. Imagine if it's been 7 years. It was painful as the air passed up over my sinuses. It brought tears to my eyes. But it was the most gorgeous pain ever. Because one of the problems I had was that I can't sleep if I can't breathe through my nose. And so for 7 years, I hadn't slept properly. For 7 years, the only way I could sleep is if I took some kind of a cortisone spray into my nose or a decongestion, which incidentally, they're addictive. So you squirt it up in your nose, it opens it for one night, and it makes it worse the next day. And I breathed in through my nose, and suddenly I started feeling like my life was different. Another 2 weeks in, so now 30 days of change, I had then dropped 35 pounds in weight. I was breathing through my nose. My acne was completely gone. The stomach cramps that I'd been living with, these stomach cramps, incidentally, my mother told me there was a name for them. Our last name, my mom's last name is Dutoit, and it's a French name from South Africa, and she said those are called the Dutoit cramps because everybody in the Dutoit 5 as a family gets them. You know what it's called? It's called lactose bloody intolerance is what it's called. It's called not being good at milk. It's called being a homo sapien is what it really is, you know? And so all of a sudden that pain is gone, but you know what's funny about pain is that when it's gone, you forget you had it, and I totally forgot I had it. So I didn't even notice it was gone. I noticed the acne was gone. I noticed I could breathe. I noticed I'd lost the weight because I had to buy clothes. But I didn't notice that pain was gone until about another month later. And another month later, a very good friend of mine, she would become one of my first real girlfriends, Carrie, she invited me over to her house. And a bunch of friends, Tim and a bunch of us. And we were all into this healthy stuff, so she cooked a very healthy meal, or what she thought was healthy. And it was pretty good. And then dessert came along, and you know what she had for dessert? Apple crumble with Haagen-Dazs. I hadn't had that for like 6 weeks. I hadn't eaten apple pie for 6. I hadn't had ice cream for 6 weeks. And you know what? I thought, you know what? I don't want to be rude. I don't want to be rude. She's gone to all this effort of scooping the ice cream out and putting it on the bowl. I mean, that's effort. That takes a lot of effort to do that, you know? And the pie, I mean, she had to take that out of the wrapper from the store and put it in the oven. I mean, that's a lot of effort. I didn't want to be rude, so I ate the stuff. And then I remembered the cramps because they hit. They hit so badly that like it always was, I couldn't even think. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, those cramps were always food related. At this point, I became fanatical. I became a food crank. You didn't want to go out for dinner with me. You guys now, I watch you. I've been at live events where you guys have been at my live events, and you guys go to the dinner line, you go to the lunch line, and you guys are picking stuff up, and you go, oh, crap, Eric's coming. I don't know. I got to check. You guys think I'm like the food police, and I want you to remember something. I'm not. WildFit is about freedom. It's about you ultimately choosing. You get that that's what we're giving you is choice, right? And so back then, I was not about giving people choice. Back then, I'd like walk up and say, what is that cow pus doing on your plate? Why would you allow that mucus in your mouth? I was vigilant. But I was at the beginning of that ignorance curve, you know, that curve where you think you know everything, but it turns out you actually don't know a great deal at all, just because you've had a little bit of results. There's a name for it. It's slipping my mind at the moment. The Dunning, it'll come to me later. But the point is, I was at the beginning of that process. I thought I knew a great deal. And then something else happened, as many of you know, is that I went and spoke to one of my doctors because I had decided not to have my tonsils cut out. And one of the questions I put to my doctor was, how long did you go to medical school? Now, I would like you to imagine, you need to understand, when I was 21 years old, I looked about 15. I was one of those kids that my body just didn't catch up and grow right away. Like, I just looked 15. You imagine this 15-year-old looking kid walking up to his doctor and saying, how long did you go to medical school? And of course, he said 6 years. You know, he's a general practitioner. And I said, okay, so here's my next question for you. In that 6 years, how long did you spend studying food? And he said, well, none. I'm a doctor. Well, none? I'm a doctor? Now, again, I didn't fully spot this pattern for many years, but later the metaphor would come to me. Later the metaphor would come. Would you take your car to a mechanic who never studied gas or oil? I don't think so. And I continue to ask doctors this question, including my uncle. My uncle was a very a very well-respected orthopedic surgeon, following in the steps of his father, who was a world-famous orthopedic surgeon. And I went to him one day. We were sitting in South Africa having had dinner, just the two of us sitting at the meal. Everybody else had gone to bed. And I said to my uncle, hey, I'm curious, how long did you go to medical school? And for him, it was like 8 or 10 years because he was a specialist and a surgeon. And I said, listen, I don't want to sound impertinent here, but how much of that time did you spend studying food? And I'm not kidding you. This is what he does. He goes, huh? You know, like dogs when they're confused. You know what I'm talking about? Like, huh? And in that moment, he had an epiphany. And the epiphany was that it was insane that he'd never studied food. He saw it, like clear as day, he saw it. How can I go to school, medical school for 10 years and not study food? Now, something we talked about yesterday when we had all the coaches here is different types of education. And something I'm a big fan of is what I think we should really be calling, say, divergent education, and that is teaching children about creativity and possibilities. Whereas the current school model is about teaching very convergent, that there is a right answer. And so the example I used yesterday is if you go and you show, a 4-year-old kid a brick and you go, what is this? And they go, whatever you want it to be. I mean, it could be a car. Could it be a car? Could it be an airplane if they throw it hard enough? It could be any number of things to a kid. It could be a paperweight. It could be a doorstop. It could be any number of things. But the minute you ask somebody who's been to university what that is, what is it? It's a brick. And if they studied chemistry, they'll give you the breakdown. But it's a brick. It's a brick. It's a brick. And I think we lose so much in our society by educating children into one single convergent right answer. And I was so fortunate that I had massive curiosity. I always was. I'm not sure I'll accept me as walking encyclopedia thing. I'm a little bit more surface than that. I can't pretend to go quite as deep as that, but I have a wild curiosity. And so my wild curiosity got me thinking a lot about why doctors didn't study food. I got really curious about that. And then at the same time, I got really curious about something else, and that was that my father's grandfather had discovered the oldest Homo sapien skull in the history of Earth. And so I used to sit, like I held a cast of this skull in my hand. This skull, it's 259,000 years old. Think about that. Like there are caves that my grandfather excavated along the coast of South Africa, and those caves, people have been living in them until recently. People lived in them continuously for 200,000 years. I want you to just put this into perspective for a minute. If you live in Eastern Canada and you have an old house, or Eastern America, and you have an old house, how old is it? If it's 200 years old, it's ancient. It's probably a museum. Right? If you live in England and your house is 200 years old, they're going, still new. I mean, it's pretty new. And then if you go a little further into Europe, if you end up in Croatia, there are buildings that we visited a couple years ago that people have been living in for 1,000 years. 1,000 years in this one walled city we went to. People have been living in that city since it was built 1,000 years ago. Then if we want to go out, we could go to, say, the Egyptian pyramids. Not that somebody was living in them, but what are they? 3,500, 4,000 years old. That we call it ancient Egypt. Ancient. But I want you to consider the math of this. People have been living in those caves for 200,000 years. That makes the pyramids 5 minutes ago. And I became fascinated with what life must have been like for this guy. There were 2 holes in his skull. 2 holes. And they're exactly the right size for a young leopard or a hyena. What we don't know is whether those bite marks caused his death or if they happened after his death. We don't know. But I used to sit and daydream about it. I would sit there and wonder what life was like. And I had the advantage of having been born in Africa and having visited the game reserves in Africa on a regular basis, so I knew what the bush looked like. So when I daydreamed it was pretty real. I could really go in there and imagine what hunting was like. And so I developed this fascination with anthropology and evolution and natural selection. And then the other thing that really got me was that seminar. How is it possible that I made so much more money after just 3 days with one person speaking the whole time? How was it possible? You see, because I'd worked in a sales company for a long time. And you know how sales companies are. Don't they bring in motivational speakers, right? They bring in the motivational speaker and you feel good. They make you feel good. Jump up and down and have fun and you feel good. And you kind of, in that moment, as the seminar's wrapping up, you think, man, I'm going to be a different person on Monday. I'm going to be so much more motivated. And then what happens on Monday? Back to my old desk. Back to the way it used to be. But something was different that time with Tony. Something was different. And guys, I know Tony's gotten himself in a little hot water in the press lately and what have you. And all I'm going to tell you is he's a human being. You know, we all have our good and bad. And I don't want to get into that debate. Here's what I want to tell you is he had an immeasurable impact on my life, because when I showed up for work on that Monday after the program, my behavior was actually different. Without effort, I made more sales calls. I managed my state of mind better. I used rapport skills when I was speaking. Naturally, they came to me. Things that they taught were changing my behavior, and I became really fascinated. So I want you to watch this, because what's going on is, as a young man, I'm becoming deeply interested in health and nutrition because doctors aren't studying it. And then I'm also becoming really fascinated with nutritional anthropology, or I should just say anthropology at that point, and human history. And then completely separately that, I become fascinated with behavioral change. How can you use words to actually change somebody's behavior? Or, as Mia put it, how can you get your voice in their head to coach them even when you're not there? And I started studying these things. Some years later, we sat down and said, we're ready to actually share this with people. And we invited our first group of 8 people together. And we brought 8 people together on a Google Hangout. I know, it's almost like archaeological record now, Google Hangout. And we sat down and we took these 8 people through the first ever WildFit Challenge. And what we saw was life-changing to us. It was life-changing to them, therefore life-changing to us. And you know, that empathy, that pain thing that I was talking about, what was really fascinating is it turns out it works across the internet. It turns out that I can be talking to somebody and then I can feel their pain reducing. I can feel their stress reducing. Like, do you guys, you guys all know this at this point, but I want you to think back to what it's like for most of the people out in the world. How much energy do they lose? How much energy do they lose every day arguing with themselves about food? When we get to week 7 and we talk about the energy release, a lot of that energy release, yes, some of it's metabolistic, some of it has to do with switching food, but some of it has to do with the fact that you walk past the stuff that used to be tempting to you and you no longer have to have a dialogue about it. Making decisions is massively energy draining to the human species. You may have heard the story about Steve Jobs always wearing the same color t-shirt and the same jeans pretty much all the time. And he was asked why he does that. And he said, because I have a lot of decisions to make in the day. And so this gives me one less decision I have to make. Now, that may sound crazy to you, but then studies have gone on to show, for example, God forbid any of you need to go for a parole hearing. I hope not. I'm hoping that doesn't happen. But if you ever do need to go for a parole hearing, you want to make sure that you're scheduled first thing in the morning. First thing in the morning, because the first 2 people that go for parole, statistically, they get parole. Everybody else, not so much. Why? Because what's happening to the people on the parole board is that they are getting decision fatigue. And once you get decision fatigue, you take the easiest, safest option. Well, if they're looking at some criminal and deciding whether to get their parole, then the safest option is to say no. If it can affect them like that, how much do you think it affects people that they no longer have to walk past the food aisle and think all the time? And yes or no? Yes or no? Are you with me on this? So, as that first class of 8 people went through, we suddenly realized that we had done something that might actually be disruptive in the food industry. Because we know how the diet industry works. The diet industry works where you publish a book and you get it out onto the bestsellers list, and yes, a few people read it and a few people get results, and a lot of those people lose their results. But before they lost the results, you take you get your 8 testimonials and you publish your website and you sell the next batch of books. And unfortunately, the diet industry, most people are going on diet after diet after diet after diet, and what we saw was 8 people wholesale transform, and then we did another class of 8, then we did another class of 8. And then it grew and grew, and I know that most of you already know this, but last year, or I guess a year and a half ago, we went through a real serious transition because all of a sudden, one of my friends, Kim, comes along and he says, can I tell my network? The change in his body was so wholesale. He says, can I tell my network? And we go, yeah, go ahead. And he tells his network, and where we used to have 150 clients a year, we suddenly had 200 clients in a day. And we really knew we were onto something. And it went from curiosity to like full-on mission. And then another friend of mine in Vancouver, Canada said the same thing. He's like, hey, can I tell my network? Yeah, another 150 people sign up. And then Vishen Lakiani comes along from Mind Valley, and he says, can I tell my network? At this point, we said, not yet. Because we understood we could absorb 200 pretty quickly. We'd built the systems, but there's no way we could absorb what he might do to us or for us, right? And so we then invested heavily in WildFit. We spent a huge amount of money, and we built the platforms, and we built our systems and so on, and then Vishen put it out to his network, and 1,100 people signed up. And in a sense, the rest has been history. And we've continued to grow, and we've continued to have results, and every single day we get the messages from people about how their life has changed, how their friends' life has changed, how their children's lives have changed, how they're no longer on this medication, how their fibromyalgia is gone, how their inflammation is gone, how their arthritis is no longer with them, how they've lost this weight, or how they... Every single day we get messages like that. And I want you to know that when we observed something, we observed that because our clients are all over the world, when they wanted to put a little meetup together, it was like, yeah, we have clients in 20 countries, maybe 5,000 of them, maybe 6,000 of them in 20 countries, but that means they're scattered. If we had 6,000 clients in Copenhagen, it would be really easy to get a meetup together, right? But it wasn't like that for us. Our clients were so spread out, and so we went to the Mind Valley reunion, and we had like 400 WildFit clients in one place. We had a dinner. Was anybody at that dinner at the True Food Cafe? Yeah. Like we had that dinner, and we had, about 40 of us all together. And that event was, again, life-changing for me. Because now I wasn't hearing one WildFit recovery story and then moving on with my life. Because that's how it used to be. I'd hear one, or somebody would write to me, and I'd get a help desk note. And I might see one, and then I'd see another one. But all of a sudden, I was hearing 200 of them at once. I remember one day I got to walk with David. You guys all need to meet David. I got to walk around the Empress Hotel with David one day. We're walking around the grounds, shooting some stuff for a documentary we're working on. And David says, yeah, David, he's very excited about WildFit and stuff. But I'm looking at David. He's a healthy guy. He's probably one of those people who joined the program just for health optimization. And then you've got those friends that say like monumental stuff, but they say it like it's nothing. You know what I'm talking about? We're walking along, and I go, so how was it for you? And he's like, well, I lost 70 pounds. 70 pounds. Because of my status with United Airlines, I'm allowed to take a 70-pound bag on the plane. 70 pounds? You got to show them their picture later. We might throw that up on the screen. But I'm walking along with David, and all of a sudden what I find is these face-to-face interactions that I'm having, it made me want us to gel our community even more tightly, and that's really what gave birth to the idea of us doing what is happening here. There are so many things going on our planet right now. Like, I don't like calling it global warming. I don't like calling it global warming. You know why I don't? Because that politicizes it. I'll tell you, you want to argue for global warming, I'll argue against it. You want to argue against it, I'll argue for it. I'll tell you right now that one of the reasons we think global warming is so incredibly important for us to deal with is that most of our temperature records on Earth come from city cores, because we never used to measure the temperature in the country. We never used to measure that. Nobody was out in the middle of Saskatchewan measuring the temperature in the wheat fields. I don't even think they were measuring it in Saskatoon, never mind the wheat fields. But you know where they were measuring it was in city cores. And then those cities grew, and those cities grew, and those cities grew, and they produced more pollution, and they produced more energy, and the buildings have more energy bleed. And so all of those cities are warmer today than they were. That's where the original statistics came from. Please hear me. I'm not arguing against global warming. I'm telling you that if we call it something, we will find a way to argue against it. What I am really clear about is that we live in a very thin layer around the edge of our rock. You know, people say we got to save the planet. No, we don't. It's 99% a big piece of rock that's just going to keep flying through space no matter what we do to it. But the thing we got to save is that thin blue layer around the outside. And I don't care if we can, because I will tell you that as much as I don't want to call it global warming, I really believe that we are far more likely to be plunged back into a very deep glaciation than we are to deal with global warming. I think that's far scientifically more likely that one day there's glaciers. You guys, this is a funny geographical thing for you. Have you ever noticed where England is compared to where, say, Nova Scotia is? England is way north than Nova Scotia. Farther north. Dramatically further north. Nova Scotia, minus 15 in the wintertime routinely. England, if they got to minus 15, the country would fall apart. They would. Their houses aren't insulated. It would fall apart. There would be deaths everywhere. Why is it so much warmer? Because the Gulf Stream warms up water, sends it up the east coast of the United States, and then it takes a big right turn and it goes off to England. It doesn't really do much for Nova Scotia, but it warms up England. What do you suppose happens if the Gulf Stream stops flowing? If it stops flowing, then England is under a mile of ice. Now, I'm not here to frighten you about this. What I'm trying to say is there's no point labeling it. Do you think we can get just about everybody, even the far, far right, do you think we can get just about everybody to agree there's too much plastic in the ocean?
Yes.
Yeah, do you think we can get pretty much everybody to agree that the air pollution levels around the world are too much? So that's what I'm kind of interested in doing, is finding out what we can agree on. And here's the one thing I think we need to agree on, is that one of the biggest dangers we face right now, both economically and environmentally, is the food production system on Earth. It is the most dangerous activity, one of the most dangerous activities. I think there are a couple more that are more dangerous, but they're only being done by a few screwball scientists. The really dangerous stuff is the stuff we're all doing. That's dangerous. When we're all doing it, it becomes really dangerous. And so the way we're living right now is bad for our bodies, not us, but the way the world is living right now is bad for their bodies and bad for our bigger body, and that is Earth. And so I want you to know that here we stand. We called this WildFest Beta because it's a test run. Things are going to go wrong. I want you to know. Some have already gone wrong. Sherry, I'm so sorry. Where are you? I'm so sorry. Sherry was literally the first person to sign up for WildFest, and somehow one of the email funnels didn't get turned on properly for her when she came in, and everybody got their email notifications, and Sherry didn't. I'm sorry. She's a really good friend of mine, so I'm sure she'll forgive me in time. But things will go wrong. It's the beta version, but it's the beta version of something that I think is really important, because us building community is vastly important. Us sharing, us using and our voting with our money and making our food decisions as a group gives us the opportunity to have a huge amount of influence, but it does something else I think that's really important. And that is, by hanging out with people that have similar values, that believe similar things about food, we make it easier for us. Is it true? Like it just is. It's the weirdest thing. But if you're hanging out with a bunch of people that all eat a certain way, it feels weird to break out. You can be with them. I mean, how many of you have had this experience? You're with some people that are eating really bad, stuff that you really don't even want, but you start feeling a little left out, and eating it might help you feel get it. Have you ever had a little of that feeling? If you saw the TV series Friends, if any of you ever watched Friends, I remember there's a really funny series, a really funny episode where Jennifer Aniston, Rachel, she's working at some Macy's or somewhere, and everybody smokes, but she doesn't, which is really funny because all of those actors smoked, which blew me away. But her character didn't smoke, and so she always was left out of the cigarette breaks. So she would have to go outside and pretend to be a smoker so she could fit in. You know, what's better is for us to hang around the people who aren't smoking. And I don't mean that we can't be friends with them. I don't mean that we have to say goodbye to them and cut off our friendships. I'm saying that what we want to do is build a community around us of people that support our values and support our food. Does this make sense to you guys? So that's what we're here to do. And I want you to know the next 3 days, they're going to be fun. We have a really neat collection of people right here in the room. Any number of you could be up here sharing your brilliance, and I'd be happy to hear it. Like, I know because I've gotten to meet so many of you, and I'll get to meet so many of you more. We also have brought in some other people to specifically share some fantastic stuff with you. And we've got some really cool activities that are going to make it a lot of fun. And I want you to think about something the whole time. This is the beginning. I want you to think about this is the beginning. And I'd love you to have your, because we're going to have a little discussion at some point on day 3 about what WildFest should look like in the future, and you guys are going to help us make it. Does that sound good? You guys are going to help us build it and create the experience that it's going to be for people. Because the more we can create community, the bigger impact that we can have out elsewhere. One last thing I want to leave you with. At the first level, what WildFit really is about changing your food psychology, right? Isn't it? It's about giving you freedom. It's about putting you in a situation where you get to choose what it is that you eat, and you get to choose what it is that you don't eat. And many of you, how many of you right now have foods that used to have control over you that literally aren't even foods for you anymore? How many of you feel like that? That's what we want to go out and do for the world. We want to do that so that the manufacturers don't have that influence on us. That's the first level of it. The next level of it is to live that way, to carry that forward into our lives. And so the question is, where does that go? And I think it goes like this. It's about slowing down aging. Isn't it? It's about aging much more gracefully. Like, I remember when I first started getting interested in food and health, and people would walk up to me and go, well, Eric, you can't live forever. Don't they say that? Well, you can't. What do you think? You're going to live forever? And, you know, I don't really care about living forever. These days, by the way, there's some discussion. I mean, you got Gary Kurzweil and these guys out there saying maybe it can happen that some of us in this room are inside the age group, the age bracket that might hit what they call longevity escape velocity. In other words, some of us in this room might live long enough that we actually can escape the longevity thing. I don't care. But just in case, I want my body to be in the best shape when it happens. Or more to the point, I want to live the highest quality of life that I can. So what food did for me was give me my energy back, give me my psychology back, let me think for myself. Because you know that food, like, does food change the way you think? Does what you eat change the way you think? Absolutely. And so that's what changing my diet did for me. But WildFit is so much more than that. It's about you looking at the way your family structure works, because we're going to have a panel over the next couple days where we talk about families and we talk about how we live in this future world. We're going to be talking about flexibility, because I'll tell you, I really believe this, that aging, actually, if you really think about it, is the process of losing flexibility. Does this make sense to you? Yeah, it's the process of losing your mental flexibility, and it's also the process of losing your physical flexibility. So one of our guests is going to be talking to you guys exactly about flexibility, and I want to, just for a little fun, I want to show you that you can turn things around and you can turn the clock back. Some years ago, Elise became the Bikram lady. For those of you who don't know, I think you all know who Elise is, but Elise is my wife, and she's sitting right back over there. Everybody say hi, Elise. All right, and so Elise gets into stuff. She gets into stuff. Right? And she gets into it, and then she's in that stuff. So she got into Bikram, and she became the Bikram lady, and nobody could talk to Elise without learning about Bikram. And so I went off to do Bikram. And by the way, I'm aware that Bikram Chowdhury has had his problems, and I'm not a big fan, but the yoga that he put together, I'm a big fan of. And so we go off to this Bikram yoga class, and they tell us to lie on the floor in the rest, and they said, put your cheek to the floor, right? So you want to lie down on the floor and put your cheek to the floor. I couldn't. They said, no, they even said put your ear to the floor, right? Put your ear to the floor. I couldn't get my ear to the floor. I just didn't have that level. I looked around, everybody else could. But why couldn't I? I couldn't get my ear to the floor. And then in one of the other postures, they said, well, what we want you to do is we want you to, like, lean back and look at the ceiling above you. I'm like, yeah, I can do that. And then they said, now look at the back wall. That's not what they meant, apparently. They apparently meant, like, lean back and look at the back wall. And then where did they tell me to look? At the floor. And I want to tell you that something like 3 weeks later, not even 3 weeks, about 10 days later, because we were going to classes pretty diligently, I got my ear to the ground, like no problem, no strain in my neck. I got my ear to the floor. Like I was like, oh my God, I was aging. I was aging. And then one day they said, okay, we want you to go ahead and lean back and look. And I go, okay, lean back. And they go, like, look at the back wall. And I look at the back wall. And then they go, okay. Look at the floor. We can be younger next year than we are right now. And so if you really want to jill it down, WildFit is about you having freedom to make the decisions, to eat when you want to eat, move the way you want to move, and be younger next year than you are this year. And so I am absolutely thrilled that you guys are here. We have an incredible lineup of things that are going to help you refine your habits and help you refine your life and help you be younger next year. So I want you to give all of you a big hand for being here. Thank you so very much. Thank you.